had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And of course, Revelation 13:17 states, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So this is really very important. We know the Bible is telling us that at some point we are all going to be faced with a choice, and no one can escape this test. When I go and speak on this issue, I get a number of questions, and a lot of them amount to, how can I keep my current standard of living during the end times? That's not going to happen. Sorry to break it to you, it's not going to happen. But we're all going to be faced with this test. Are we going to follow God and worship God and follow his commandments? Or are we going to follow the dictates of men that are going to be contrary to God's commandments? We should be following God because we love God and we want to do his will. So there's going to be pressure put on us to bear financially to try to coerce us to do the wrong thing. And we don't want to do that. And Sister White also talks about it. The time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth, prohibiting men to buy or sell of any man, save that he hath the mark of the beast. And I'll skip the next slide because I talked about that this morning. But the promise in Revelation 3:5 is that he that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment. And I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. So that is the blessed promise that God has for us. You know, God will take care of us. God will save us through the tribulation, just like he saved the Israelites through the plagues. He will protect his people. So we don't have anything to worry about. But we're going to live in interesting times. So let's talk about CBDC and Satan's no buy, no sell policy. And just for someone who hasn't heard this before, or it doesn't hurt to see this again and again, I find, because in the West, we are so accustomed to having freedom or perceived freedom, relative freedom. We can't really imagine someone telling us we can't buy or sell something. We can't really imagine someone taking control of our bank account and saying, you can buy this, you can't buy that. But CBDC, central bank digital currency, is fully programmable, fully traceable digital currency that is centralized or distributed by a government or its central bank. And because the one authority is issuing it, they can program it so that you can't buy certain things. They can program it to tell you what you can and can't do. They can program it to try to elicit certain behaviors from you and corral you into doing what they want you to do. So it means that the government can surveil all of your financial transactions in real time and control when, where, and upon what you can spend the currency. And it's not just me saying this. I'm going to show you quotes from central bankers and economic experts saying the exact same thing. So I'm not making this up. This isn't a conspiracy theory. I could call the conspiracy theory a lot during the pandemic and conspiracy theorist, and I'm not. I'm just telling you what they're saying. So why are they a threat to liberty? With CBDCs, the government would have the authority to decide and the power to enforce how you may or may not spend the CBDC. And there will be a digital wallet, there'll be a digital ID so that they can track you and do all these things. And these are not my words. I will show you the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank above all the central banks, the general manager said that same thing in October of 2020. So CBDCs are designed to financially constrain the user in any way the government wishes to. That's the whole point of central bank digital currency, and I'll show you another expert that says that as well. So here's the Bank of International Settlements general manager, Augustin Karsten, in 2020, October 2020, describing the difference between cash and digital currency. And he says, you can find this video on YouTube, you can find it on Rumble, it's out there. It's just a minute or so long. And he says, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. There's a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who is using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a $1,000 peso bill today. The key difference with CBDC is the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine that use of that expression of central bank liability, and will have the technology to enforce that. So when he says expression of central bank liability, if the central bank issues you central bank digital currency, it's considered a liability on the central bank. So that's what he's talking about. When they issue you the CBDC, he's telling you they'll have the absolute control over the rules and regulations as to how you can spend it, what you can do with it. And they can see exactly what you're doing with it. They can't see what you're doing with a $100 bill, but with CBDC, they can see exactly what you're doing. And that's the general manager for the Bank of International Settlements telling you that. That's not just me telling you that. So we saw this slide earlier today, but it bears repeating. With the CBDC, the government can see all of your transactions in real time and tax you instantly. They can mandate any procedures must be taken. They can turn off your money if you don't comply. They can turn off your money if they don't like what you post on social media, if they don't like your religious practices, any behavior they want to elicit from you. They can control you with the CBDC. They can turn off your money or freeze your balance until you comply. The CBDC could be programmed to expire within 30 days, and they like that feature because they can control the money supply better. Your money could be programmed so that it could not be used to buy certain things, or if they wanted to lock you down in a certain area, it wouldn't work outside that area. And I'll show you another expert that says that as well. The central bank could institute negative interest rates, which would mean a portion of that money would come out of your account. These are all the things that they could do with central bank digital currency. And that's not just me saying this. I'll show you central bankers and experts who are saying this as well. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Neil Kashkari, who's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And what he says in his remarks is basically that CBDC doesn't solve any actual problems. It doesn't provide any benefit to the user. It only provides control to enable central bankers to monitor all transactions, impose negative interest rates, and deduct taxes from your accounts in real time. And here's basically what he said. This is a direct quote of what he said. He said, "I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now." And then someone laughed in the background. And he said, "Right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do?" And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. Well, China's doing it. He said, "Well, I see why China would do it. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you wanted to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get why China would be interested, but why would the American people be for that?" And the point is, the American people wouldn't be for that if they understood that. No, they would stand up against this. So that's coming from Neil Kashkari, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. Bo Lee is an IMF deputy managing director, and he's a former deputy governor of the People's Bank of China, that's China's central bank, talking about the programmability of money at an IMF panel in 2023. And it's the programmability aspect that's one of the most dangerous aspects of central bank digital currency. And he says, and financial inclusion is one of the buzzwords that they use for reasons why central bank digital currency is good. Then you can bank the unbanked. Financial inclusion is including people who are not banking in the banking system. It's really including them into the corral that they're trying to enclose around everyone is what financial inclusion really means. But he says financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions, for example, welfare payment, for example, consumption coupon, for example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those monies can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized, for example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. That way they can also improve financial inclusion. So they're saying they're trying to give you support. They're trying to give these people money who aren't in the system so they can lure them into the system and control them, and they can dictate what you spend the money on, like with the welfare payment. That's how they would control that. So here's another central banker telling you the type of control that they will exercise over you with a central bank digital currency. This is Professor Richard Warner. He's a brilliant economist, and he gave this interview for a documentary that's called The End of Money, CBDC, The End of Money. It's a very good interview. I took a lot of his quotes and I have them here for you just because they're so illustrative of what they could do with central bank digital currency that I feel like people they have trouble wrapping their heads around these things, so I include all these quotes so that you can understand the power that they would have with central bank digital currency. He's a professor of banking and economics. He's a lecturer at the University of Oxford. He's the author of the book Princes of the Yen. He was recently on Tucker Carlson, and that is a great interview also, talking about his book and when it came out, and the CIA, came to him. He's got a lot of stories around that. It's a very good interview. He's also the father of the quantitative easing monetary concept, and he's an expert on central banks and CBDCs. And he said in this interview, CBDCs are presented as if it's something brand new, when the reality is that we've been using BDCs, bank digital currency, for many decades. When we use our credit cards and our debit cards, we're essentially, and not using cash, we're essentially using bank digital currency. They're giving us credit line and we're going out and using it, and nothing really physical is passing. It's bank digital currency. And he says, there's nothing new about that, and it works well. Bank digital currencies, that's our current system. So the only difference is the central aspect. And who's pushing for this? Well, the central planners, the central bankers are pushing for this. He says, is there a need for it? No, there is absolutely no need for this, because the current financial system does not have any problems in terms of settlement and transactions because you have choice. Once you introduce CBDCs, there's many risks and dangers of that, but one obvious one is that you're actually going to reduce choices, because for CBDCs to properly do their job, from the perspective of the issuer, from the central banks, you need to get rid of the competition. You need to get rid of cash. That's actually a declared goal of CBDCs. You've got plenty of studies by central banks and other economists in favor of CBDCs arguing that we need to abolish cash and then introduce CBDCs, because then we can have negative interest rates. We can take money directly out of people's pockets. While you still have cash, you can flee from the financial system and put your money in cash, and then they can't punish you with negative interest rates. That's why they want to abolish cash. But most of all, the really big dangers of CBDCs are the programmability, which is essentially, it's not even your money. Your money becomes potential money, because it depends on a central planner to agree that you should now be allowed to spend this money at this location for this particular transaction and then this particular volume, if you want to do. But why should that be conditional? When they describe programmability, that's what it's all about. And he's absolutely right. If you want to use your central bank digital currency, the central bank's got to agree that you can use it, that you're fit to use it, and that this particular thing is an item that you should buy. So he's very right about that. So the push for CBDCs, he says, is the final step in a multi-decade program by central planners to increase their power over the people, over countries. This is the ultimate step, because the powers of CBDCs are so extraordinary that, even the worst dictators in past centuries could only have dreamt of having such enormous power over the lives of so many people. And he's absolutely right. Dictators in the past, Ceausescu, any Stalin, any of these dictators, they would love to have this power and this technology. On CBDCs and AI, Professor Warner states, one counter-argument against this would be to say, well, okay, it's a power tool for central planners, but surely they're too busy And how could they ever plan and micromanage, 80 million people in Germany or, all these millions of people? Well, that's where AI comes in, isn't it? In other words, it will be algorithms that will, for the majority, most of the majority, control their spending in the future. The micromanaging decision will then be automated. That's even more dystopian. You have no right to appeal the algorithm because there's so many masses, you can't practically have an appeal process. You just won't be able to use your money for certain things, and there's nothing you can do. And here's where that interview can be found if you wish to find it. But his comments are so illustrative of the power that a central bank would have with central bank digital currency. Any programmable digital currency, whether it's central bank currency or not, that's the power that they would have. This was an article that came out in 2023, on July 11th, 2023. Brazil has been working on their CBDC, and it's in the pilot stage. And theirs is called the Real, the digital Real. And they had released their code out to the public for them to, examine and look at for public comment. And a blockchain developer looked at it, and he found that Brazil's CBDC contained code that would allow Brazil's central bank to, at its will, freeze and unfreeze accounts, increase and decrease account balances, move currency from one address to another, and create or burn digital real from a specific address. So this is the control that Brazil's central bank would have over this central bank digital currency. That's the code that's in there, and it enables them to do that, according to this blockchain developer. So this is, again, the type of control they would have with central bank digital currency. And CBDCs are being explored, tested, and developed worldwide. According to data from the Atlantic Council, there's 134 countries and currency unions, and that number is the same today. I looked at the numbers before I came here, and it's the same. And it represents about 98% of global GDP, which are exploring a CBDC. So this is truly a worldwide thing. All of the countries exploring and testing central bank digital currency comprise about 98% of global GDP. That's huge. And to date, there's some countries that have launched their own retail CBDC. Nigeria launched with the e-Naira, the Bahamas with Sand Dollar, and then there's some Caribbean countries that are part of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union that have Dcash, and Jamaica has the Jamdex. So there was a 2022 survey conducted by the Bank of International Settlements that revealed that 93% of the 86 central banks that surveyed have or are developing a CBDC, and it was projected that there could be 15 retail CBDCs publicly circulating by 2030. So this is the map. It was last updated July 2025 of both retail and wholesale CBDCs and where they're being explored around the world in various stages of development. So this is truly a worldwide thing. And you can find this map and this information on the Atlantic Council's website. They have a CBDC tracker. There's another CBDC tracker that's also very good. This is retail only. The map before was wholesale and retail. This is retail only. So wholesale means it's CBDC, central bank digital currency, that's passed between institutions, financial institutions and banking institutions, rather than individual. The retail is the CBDC that's issued to the individual consumer. And this is retail, but this is from cbdctracker.org. I find their data is like a little bit more complete than Atlantic Council's data, but this is the map of retail only according to CBDC Tracker. And you can see how much of the world is covered on this map. I mean, almost every country is highlighted. A list of countries that are in the launch stage, like I mentioned, are Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Nigeria with a sand dollar. The Dcash, Eastern Caribbean Union one, they kind of been floating back and forth between pilot and launched. Some of these countries have done that. China has been using their CBDC for some time, but because there's such low adoption, they keep calling it a pilot program, even though it's pretty much fully developed. It's just not popular at all. And these are lists of currencies that are in CBDCs that are in the pilot stage and the countries that are doing it. The digital euro, they expect in October to be at a decision point. Christine Lagarde, the ECB president, she stated publicly that they expect them to reach a decision in October 2025 as to whether they're going to move forward, and she's putting pressure on them to move forward. It's basically the European Parliament and Council have to get together and, basically pass it, but she wants them to move forward in October 2025. And these are more of the countries that are in the pilot stage. And so, how would a CBDC look in our country? Well, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has testified, and he said many times, he testified recently before the Senate Banking Committee in March of last year, if we are ever to do something like this, and we're a very long way from even thinking about it, we would do this through the banking system. The last thing we would want with the Federal Reserve would be to have individual accounts for all Americans, or any Americans for that matter. And he said this many times. When he's asked about CBDC, he says, we're not even thinking about it. We're not even thinking of thinking about it. We're not even thinking about thinking about it. He says, so you don't have to worry about it. But I'll show you that that's not actually true. They've actually been thinking about it and testing it, and it's already fully developed, basically. But he says it would be done through the banking system. So that is the synthetic model of CBDC. Direct issue is direct from the central bank to the individual consumer. A synthetic model is where it goes from the central bank to a major bank like Chase or Wells Fargo or something like that, and then it's distributed to you, the individual, the consumer. And he said in September 2022, during an event hosted by the Bank of France, that if we were to pursue a CBDC, it would at a minimum have 4 characteristics. Number 1 is intermediated. That means it would be distributed to you, to a major bank like Chase or Wells Fargo or Bank of America, and then to you. So that's intermediation. Second is privacy protected, but the third is identity verified, so it would not be anonymous. There's no way to be anonymous with a central bank digital currency. The government is going to know who you are with your digital ID and know what you're spending your money on. There's no anonymity. With cash, you have anonymity. They can't know, like the general manager of the BIS, Augustin Carstens, he said, we don't know where you're spending your $100 bill today. But with central bank digital currency, it wouldn't be anonymous. They would be able to track where you're spending your currency and what you're spending it on. And the fourth is transferable or interoperable. They need it to work with different systems. But CBDCs would still be, even if it's distributed to a bank that's then distributed to you, it would still be just as traceable, programmable. It would be tied to your digital ID. Every transaction would still be recorded, monitored, programmed, and controlled by the major bank on behalf of the Federal Reserve. So synthetic CBDC is no protection from CBDC. And this is Christine Lagarde. She's the president of the European Central Bank. This was as of November 1 of 2023. They were in the preparation stage, and now they will finish that preparation stage in October of 2025. But when she issued this report, when the ECB issued this report on their investigation stage, which preceded the preparation stage, she signaled that there would be control. She said there would be limitations on the amount of digital euros that individuals or businesses might be able to hold in their digital wallets. She said on page 12 of the summary report, holding limits were identified as an effective tool and therefore would be included in the design of a digital euro. And these limits would prevent the accumulation or saving of digital euros if you're limited as to how much you can hold. So she's telling you that there would be control. She was prank called, and this video kind of went viral on YouTube and on the internet. She was called, she thought she was speaking to the president of Ukraine, but she was speaking to a prankster. And she said, she basically confirmed that spending, more than 1,000 euros right now is illegal in Europe. You can't spend 1,000 euros in cash. It puts you on the gray market, and you're subject to possible punishment, fines or arrest. And she said that she felt it was even dangerous to permit an individual to spend 300 or 400 euros in total anonymity. And the reason why she says this is because of terrorism, because, terrorists use cash, so they can't really track them, and therefore no one should have the right to use cash. That was basically her remarks. So what we have now in the US, the FedNow came out with the FedNow system. This is an instant payment system, an instant way to transfer money instantly, that's being sponsored and, hosted by the Fed, basically. Their FedNow service allows banks to participate and then offer instant transfer, instant payment services to their clients. This was launched in July of 2023, and as of August 4th, there were 1,434 banks and financial institutions participating, with 36 liquidity providers and 40 service providers. When they announced FedNow in July of 2023, they said they wanted 10,000 financial institutions to participate. And they're way behind on that. Like, there has not been much participation in FedNow since they launched 2 years ago. They only have 1,400 and they wanted 10,000. So that's interesting. I find it interesting that they're kind of, slow in adoption of this FedNow service. But Powell keeps saying, we're nowhere near adopting a CBDC. We're not even thinking about it. He said again at the U.S. Senate Banking Committee on March 7th of last year, we're nowhere near recommending, let alone adopting a central bank digital currency in any form, he says. People don't need to worry about it. But that's not true, because they have been testing a CBDC in this country, a digital dollar. Project Hamilton was a multi-year exploratory research project by the Boston Fed and MIT. And what they showed was that their open CBDC core processor was so successful, their tests were so successful that it could perform a magnitude greater than what we do now with normal, credit cards. Transactions would be even faster. They showed that they could do 1.84 million transactions per second with settlement in less than a second. It's like extremely successful. It's way faster than we do things now. And so not only have they been thinking about it, they've been testing it, and they developed it, and it's basically ready to go on the shelf. So, but he also testified in response to a question by Senator Loomis, do you still agree that the Federal Reserve cannot introduce a CBDC without congressional authorization? And he says yes. So the central bank won't just do this. They're waiting to be authorized by Congress to do this. And before Trump came into office and prohibited a CBDC, the question remained whether or not there was going to be some sort of crisis that would prompt Congress to want to do this. Because we saw how quickly Congress could act if they needed to in a crisis. When the COVID-19 pandemic was announced, it only took them 2 months and 26 days to pass the PrEP Act and the CARES Act. So if there were to be a crisis, they could act very quickly. They've shown that they can move very quickly and get legislation through, which would be the permission that Jerome Powell was waiting for to launch a CBDC. For the next 4 years, President Trump has prohibited a CBDC, so we don't have to worry about it for the remainder of his term in office. But there's a possibility that a future president could take that CBDC off the shelf if in response to a crisis. There was another development in 2024, the SWIFT Global Bank Messaging Network, which is a massive network. It's used by financial institutions all over the world. It connects over 11,000 banking and securities organizations. And for example, in November of 2022, it supported an average of like 44.8 million messages a day. So it's used by many banking institutions. They had a project, a CBDC project called the Sandbox Project. And in phase 2, they issued this report. And basically in their report, they said they were ready to launch within 1 to 2 years. And that was last year. They also demonstrated, which was very interesting, that their platform could accommodate different countries' CBDCs, and they could all be used together, even if they were built with different protocols on different platforms. They could still accommodate that. And, other countries and everything, they could still send messages through the SWIFT network with different CBDCs that are built differently. So that was quite a development as well. The Bank of International Settlements did a survey in 2023, and 86 central banks replied, representing 94% of global economic output. And they responded to various questions during the survey of what they preferred in a CBDC. About half of them wanted to see an obligation for merchants to accept it, indicating, control. And other things that they liked were more than half wanted limits on balances. Half of emerging market developing economies wanted limitations on transactions, and some wanted embedded capital flow management measures. Still, more than half wanted programmable payments, and some wanted programmable money. So this was in response to their survey. So many of these central banks do like this control aspect, and that's basically what the survey represents. Catherine Austin Fitts spoke at Hillsdale College in November 11th of 2024 about CBDCs, and here are the things that she said. And she is a great financial expert. She's an investment banker. She used to be the assistant director for housing and development, I think, under George Bush, the first George Bush. And she basically said that we don't have a financial problem, we have a secret governance system that is not transparent and is centralized and controlled. We're seeing new and potentially wonderful digital technology used to centralize control in area after area in all aspects of our life. She said the problem is not so much with the tools themselves, but with the secret governance system and how they decide to use it. She says, I believe there's only one way to stop the move to total central control, and that's by preventing control of our digital transactions or our financial transactions. And what she's saying is that she encourages people to use cash as much as possible to sort of frustrate them in their progress towards a digital programmable currency. The more you use cash, the harder it is to take it away from you, is basically her point. And she said the ongoing direct reset, the World Economic Forum calls the greater reset. This is a completely different reset than what we've ever seen, and that's because an all-digital technology, an all-digital monetary system gives you the ability to do something very radical. And she noted that Biden's nominee for control of the currency, who didn't get passed, she had published in the Vanderbilt Law Review about central bank digital currency and inflation. And she said the wonderful thing about central bank digital currency is inflation is no longer a problem. If you have inflation, you just freeze everybody's bank accounts. So fortunately, she didn't make it, but, in the confirmation process, but, this is what they're thinking. Just freeze everybody's bank accounts, and that'll solve inflation. She said the important thing to understand about central bank digital currency is an all-digital financial system is not a currency, it's a control grid. And that's what she speaks about all the time, is that it's the all-digital system, not necessarily central bank digital currency. It's any digital currency that's programmable. It's using an all-digital system. It's only using credit cards or only using debit cards and not using cash that really, you lose control when you don't use cash. You give up that, away. You give them a way to potentially control you. She says the process to implement central bank digital currency around the world is being overseen by the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, basically like I said. The Bank of International Settlements is owned by its members. The New York Fed, the Board of Governors are both shareholders in the BIS. 63 of the top central banks are in the BIS, and they're running a process with a major partnership with the Federal Reserve to implement CBDCs and their prototyping around the world. And that's why we see so many countries moving towards central bank digital currency and researching it and developing it, is because they're getting pressure from the Bank of International Settlements to do so, which is basically made up from the Fed and other central banks, but they're pushing this on the world. She also gave an interview about CBDCs and programmability in June of 2024, and her remarks were very interesting. She said, if you look at the people behind the central bankers who want and are pushing the CBDC system, they have no intention of being reasonable. And digital technology allows them to reset the economy and reset the governance and management system on the planet to a wholly new system. You cannot fathom where these people want to go. And I'll show you an example of that later on when I speak of more recent events. You cannot fathom where these people want to go, she warns us. And she says, let's go back to the lockdowns. If I don't want you leaving your house, it's really easy to enforce this with CBDCs. I can simply say, your money won't work. You can shop online and have it delivered, but your money won't work outside of your home. You can't buy gas, you can't buy food, you can't travel because your money won't work because it's programmed. And the reality is, with AI and software, they can manage you one person at a time. So the rules that can be applied to you are totally different than the rules that can be applied to your wife. So with a social credit system, if your wife is behaving better than you, you know they will custom design the controls. Ultimately, this entire system can be run from Basel, Switzerland, which can be run by Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. So this is an investment banker telling you this, not just me telling you this. So President Trump is in office now. Our Treasury Secretary now, Scott Bessent, when he was being confirmed, he also said, like Trump said during his campaign, I see no reason for the U.S. to have a central bank digital currency. And they're not going that direction. Instead, they're going the direction of stablecoins, which are also just as programmable. They're digital, they're traceable, and I'll show you evidence of that as well. So January 23rd, 2025, Trump issued this executive order strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology, which I showed you earlier today. And it revokes the Treasury's frameworks from under guidance and policies that were inconsistent with this executive order. So anything that Biden did to promote CBDC or try to move, and Biden did have an executive order which called for agencies to examine CBDC and do research on it. Well, his executive order revokes all that. And so he's prohibiting the establishment, issuance, and circulation and use of a CBDC within the United States. Another part of the executive order says agencies are prohibited from undertaking any action to establish, issue, or promote CBDCs. But he also wants to support the reasonable growth and use of digital assets, blockchain technology, and related technologies across all sectors. And blockchain technology is not necessarily bad, but if it's controlled by a central authority, then it becomes bad. It's the control aspect and the programmability that's dangerous. And his executive order aims to protect the sovereignty of the US dollar to promote the development and growth of lawful and legitimate dollar-backed stablecoins worldwide. This is stablecoins like Tether. Tether is a dollar-backed stablecoin. Circle is another dollar-backed stablecoin. And what they're looking to do, as he says in this executive order, is to prop up the US dollar. If you've heard the term de-dollarization before, you may have heard on the news that other countries were dumping US treasuries and trying to move away from the US dollar. Well, they want to support the dollar by encouraging the development of stablecoins, because stablecoins, in order to issue a stablecoin that's worth $1, in order to be tied to the dollar, they have to have reserves to back that up. And they're buying US treasuries to do it. So that's why they want to support it, because while other countries are not buying US treasuries, here come the stablecoin issuers that will start buying US treasuries. So they have a demand for that. They create a demand for US treasuries. July 18th, just last month, President Trump signed the Genius Act into law. The Genius Act stands for Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for US Stablecoins. It's the first major federal legislation in the United States to regulate stablecoins. It was passed by the Senate, then the House on July 17th, and then signed into law by President Trump the next day on July 18th. It establishes a comprehensive regulatory framework for U.S. dollar-backed stablecoins and stablecoin issuers, and it's designed to provide clarity on this issue in the digital asset industry. But if you go to the White House website and you look at the fact sheet for the Genius Act, there's a section called Combating Illicit Activity in Digital Assets. And through regulation and registration of stablecoin issuers, the Genius Act explicitly subjects stablecoin issuers to the Bank Secrecy Act, which obligates them to establish effective anti-money laundering measures and sanctions and compliance programs with risk assessments, sanctions list verification, and customer identification. So they're going to have to do KYC, know your customer, be able to identify you, and do all the anti-money laundering things that the banks are subject to. It also improves the Treasury Department's ability to combat illicit stablecoin activities by enhancing sanctions and money laundering enforcement capabilities. And all stablecoin issuers must possess the technical capability to seize, freeze, and burn payment stablecoins when legally required, and must comply with lawful orders to do so. That's right on the White House's website. That's right on their fact sheet about dollar-backed stablecoins and the Genius Act. The Genius Act will require all the stablecoin issuers to have the capability to seize your coin, freeze your coin, or burn payment stablecoins when the government wants them to do so, when they're legally required to do so. And they have to comply with lawful orders to do so. So this is what I've been saying. I've been saying this at prior speaking engagements, and other people have been saying this. Stablecoins, people don't realize that stablecoins are just as programmable, just as surveillable, and just as seizable as a CBDC. So CBDC is dangerous, but stablecoins are just as dangerous as well, and probably even more so, because a CBDC is issued by the government, and we have a constitution in this country. We have a First Amendment that's supposed to be upheld. But private issuers don't have to abide by the U.S. Constitution. They could deny you rights, they could seize your coin, and they could violate your constitutional rights without any problem. And we saw that during the pandemic. It was released in the Twitter files, once Musk took over Twitter and released all the Twitter files, that the White House under Biden was directly telling the social media companies to censor certain types of speech and not and we saw massive censorship during the pandemic. We're still seeing it on some platforms. So in this way, like the White House did with the social media companies censoring speech, we could see the White House or the government or the central bank telling the stablecoin issuers to restrict your spending habit, which is basically the way you spend money is an expression of your speech, essentially. And they could restrict your spending according to lawful orders to do so. If there was an executive order mandating worship on a certain day, and you're violating that, the government could order the stablecoin issuer to freeze your coin. And the Tether is the biggest stablecoin issuer right now. They have, they're like a 1.65 billion market cap or something like that, 400 million users worldwide. And this is what the CEO of Tether had said. This was when they were being investigated by Congress, stablecoin issuers were. He said, with Tether, every action is online, every action is traceable, every asset can be seized, and every criminal can be caught. So if they deemed your activity to be criminal, they could seize your coin. This is the control that stablecoin issuers have over the stablecoins that they issue. So it's not like Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, a digital currency that you can buy and you can self-custody it on a little device, on a digital wallet that you plug into your computer. And you don't have to go through an exchange. You can exchange it peer-to-peer, person to person, without getting an exchange involved. With stablecoins, you have to go through their platform. So they could really control whether or not you can spend that stablecoin or whether your stablecoin should be seized. They don't have that with Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, you can hold Bitcoin and no one can really take that away from you unless you give them your digital wallet or your seed words, your passphrases and all that sort of thing. Our U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, he said at a Bitcoin conference last year, Tether will seize any amount of coin in illicit activity. So he confirmed what the CEO of Tether had said when he was speaking at a Bitcoin conference last year. So this shows the type of control that they have with these stablecoins over you. It's just as much control as a central bank would have over a CBDC over you. President Trump's bill establishes the regulatory framework. Under the bill, only permitted issuers could issue a payment stablecoin for use by U.S. persons. So they're not only controlling how they would relate to their customers as far as complying with anti-money laundering. The bill determines who can actually be a stablecoin issuer, and also requires stablecoin issuers to maintain reserves on a one-to-one basis. So they need to buy U.S. treasuries in order to do that. This is how the government is trying to support the U.S. dollar by requiring these reserves. Tether and stablecoin issuers like that have to buy more U.S. treasuries, which supports the U.S. dollar. The effective date of the act would be the earlier of two dates, either 18 months after the date of enactment of the act, which was actually 7/18/27, or 120 days after the primary federal payment stablecoin regulators issue regulations about the act. Also, like I said, with the anti-money laundering laws, the Secretary of the Treasury is going to seek public comment to identify innovative or novel methods, techniques, or strategies to detect illicit activities such as money laundering involving digital assets. And within 3 years after the enforcement of the act, FinCEN, the Financial Enforcement Network, will have to issue public guidance related to innovative methods to detect illicit activity, money laundering involving digital assets, essentially. So they defined a payment stablecoin as a digital asset. It's a digital representation of value that is recorded on a cryptographically secured digital ledger that's used or designed as a means of payment or settlement rather than investment, and it can be exchanged or redeemed in the future for a stable fixed amount of monetary value of national currency or deposit. So they also define digital asset service provider. It's any entity that for compensation or profit transacts or is a custodian of digital assets, including payment stablecoins. And the SEC and CFTC will not be regulating stablecoins. They have other organizations in the federal government that will be regulating stablecoins, but they won't be considered securities that the SEC or the CFTC will regulate. Proponents of stablecoins argue that it has many benefits. With stablecoins, businesses and consumers can transact in a cheaper and faster manner with less counterparty and foreign exchange risk. I don't think there's less counterparty risk, but it definitely provides faster settlement and cheaper transactions. And these are the benefits that they say why we should have stablecoins and why we should use stablecoins. So I get a lot of people asking me, what are you talking about? Like, what is all this stuff? It's very technical. I know. It's hard to wrap your mind around if you're not in the technology and not familiar with the technology. I mean, I have trouble sometimes becoming familiar with this technology and reading about it and trying to wrap my head around some of these technological things. But people want to know what this stuff is. And they don't, so what is a blockchain? So when they talk about things being tokenized on a blockchain is a decentralized digital ledger that securely stores records across a network of computers in a way that is transparent, immutable, and resistant to tampering. So each block in the chain contains data, a timestamp, a cryptographic hash of the previous block, which forms a chain where additional block links the ones before it. So every block is linked to the one before it. So it's very difficult to falsify the transactions. They're immutable, they're traceable, they're not easily changed, because then you would have to change the blocks around it. So this makes a blockchain resistant to alteration, because changing any block would require changing all the other blocks and obtaining network consensus to accept these changes. So that's one of the benefits of blockchain. But a blockchain only has these benefits if it's decentralized. If a blockchain is just centralized with one authority, it's really just a database at that point. It doesn't act as a true blockchain. So if it's centralized with one authority, there's that danger that they could change things and they could manipulate as they want to, because it's just a centralized database. So what's a stablecoin? So a stablecoin is a digital asset. It's a type of cryptocurrency that's designed to maintain stable value relative to a specific asset. So where cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, XRP, Solana, those values go up and down like all the time, they fluctuate wildly. A stablecoin is not supposed to do that. It's supposed to just be pegged to the value of something so that it doesn't fluctuate, so you can transact with it and buy other digital assets. Some stablecoins are tied to oil, the price of oil. Some are tied to the price of gold. Some are tied to most are tied to the price of the US dollar. But it can be tied to any specific asset or a basket of assets. So President Trump, I have to speak about the developments with President Trump. And when I speak about these things, I'm not being political. You know, I'm not making or saying an opinion of Trump either way. I'm just showing you the things that he's doing in the light of Bible prophecy, because I feel like it's necessary to know these things and see how it's fitting in with Bible prophecy. He's doing a lot of things right now that's advancing these digital programmable currencies. So when I say these things, I'm not promoting Trump or attacking Trump. Please don't take any of my comments as political. It's really not political the way I'm looking at it. I'm just looking at what's going on with the financial system. The financial system is not political. So on March 2nd, 2025, President Trump talked about having a private crypto reserve, and he named the cryptocurrencies Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, Solana, that he wanted to be included in a strategic crypto reserve for the United States. And he's demonstrated he's going all in on digital assets. And Scott Bessent has said that as well, the Treasury Secretary. He said in a Bloomberg interview, we're going big on digital assets. So Trump administration has digital assets our priority. Past administrations starved and almost made extinct a lot of these companies and pushed it offshore. So what we want to do is apply the highest regulatory and AML standards to digital assets, especially stablecoins. So he was signaling that they were going to do this with the Genius Act, applying high anti-money laundering standards to digital assets and regulating them so that they can have that control over who issues them, you know, what type of reserves have to be maintained as well, and who can use them. If you're caught up in illicit schemes and money laundering, anything like that, your coin's going to be seized. Or anything that the government deems to be illicit or illegal, the government will be seizing your coin, is basically what he's telling you. And also, he also commented on this movement to support the US dollar through dollar-backed stablecoins by requiring them to buy US treasuries. They don't require them to buy US treasuries, but they do it because it's the easiest way for them to maintain their reserves. And Scott Bessent said, I've seen estimates that just over the short term, stablecoins could create $2 trillion of demand for US treasuries and treasury bills. And it's only at about 300 billion right now, so he's talking about creating $2 trillion of demand for US treasuries. So they're really looking at stablecoins and stablecoin issuers to save the US dollar. Where other countries are dumping US treasuries, this is creating a new buyer for US treasuries. Tether, on their website, they have a transparency page where they show their reserves, and they show that about 90% of their reserves, or 80.99%, 81% of their reserves are US treasuries. That's massive. So and right now they're about the 4th largest purchaser of U.S. Treasuries and the 18th largest holder of U.S. Treasuries. So they're really going in on stablecoins so that they can save the U.S. dollar and not, have it fall. President Trump has said many times that if we were to lose our reserve status in the world, if the dollar lost its reserve status, that would be the equivalent of losing a world war. So he's not going to let that happen. He's going all in on digital assets to do that. In recent interviews, Whitney Webb, Mark Goodwin, they've all said that stablecoins are just as programmable, surveillable, and seizable as CBDCs are. And they said that I think those are a threat to our financial privacy and ultimately our financial freedom. It bears repeating what the Tether CEO said. With Tether, every action is online, every action is traceable, every asset can be seized, and every criminal can be caught. So this goes back to, again, what Catherine Austin Fitts was saying. It's this all digital system. Really, you lose control over everything, and you're subject to someone else's control. That's the danger of the all digital system. So let's talk about tokenization now. So where CBDCs and stablecoins, that's really your money. Tokenization is everything else. And I spoke about that this morning very briefly. It's important to note that tokenization poses the same risks that CBDCs pose with respect to control. They're not private, they're programmable, and they take from you what control you think you might have over your asset and transfer it to the entity that controls the programmable ledger that holds the digital token. That's important to understand about tokenization. Where you have an asset and you want to control that asset directly, if you tokenize it, you're putting an intermediary between you and the asset. So whoever controls the platform, you've given them control over your asset, in a sense. It's important to understand that. There's this gentleman, Edward Dowd. He's an investment executive and founding partner of Finance Technologies, and he's been speaking out about this as well. And specifically with respect to tokenization, he says, we're sleepwalking towards the biggest asset grab in the history of the planet. He says they're trying to destroy farms, land, and businesses, freedoms, housing, individual wealth, travel, and own them or sell them off to the highest bidder. And at the same time, they're trying to ring fence society into the entrapment of being controlled by data, either through health passports or the slow mission creep towards central bank digital currencies. He said, it's a giant asset grab of what we own and control. They frame this all in being in our best interests, but it's the biggest swindle ever. And this gargantuan virtue contract comes with a huge slice of authoritarianism. So this is another investment guy, a hedge fund guy, telling us what he sees with respect to tokenization, CBDCs, and this move towards digital control of everything. So it's important to note. On the other side, the advocates claim that tokenization on blockchains offers benefits like increased counterparty risks, enhanced transparency, lower transaction costs, and there's also a move to tokenize real-world assets, converting tangible assets into digital tokens using blockchain technology. Proponents say that this enhances liquidity and transparency and accessibility, but really it's putting another party in the path of control between you and your asset. Things that are being tokenized include financial assets like stocks and bonds and equities, as well as real estate, art, commodities, and intellectual property. All these things are being tokenized on a blockchain ledger. And